What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Johnny G in the morning. Hope you guys are having a great day. I have a great one for you today. It's called the West Memphis 3. Not sure if anyone has ever heard of the West Memphis 3. It's a very interesting story. It's another one. If you guys haven't realized, I like doing ones where there's really no closure. They always kind of come to an end of, I want people to do their own research. I want people to have their own opinions. I want people to kind of have a discussion about it, see if we can come on some common ground, see if we can have a conversation, maybe a little debate on what we think happened. Those are kind of the ones I'm going for. I have had some other ones get brought up to me of, hey, you should do the Chris Watts story. I've seen that one. And there's closure on that. I mean, we know that the husband did it. If you guys don't know that story, check it out. It was all over the news. It was about the guy that murdered his wife and children. So I try to go more towards the ones that make you think a little bit as you're listening, or make you do a little bit more research, towards the end of it. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. So here it is. The West Memphis 3, guys. The date was May 5th, 1993. Around 6 p.m., the West Memphis Police Department got a phone call from disgruntled parents. It was John and Melissa Byers. Their son wasn't home. Officer Meek was on call and working that night, where she met with them. Where they said, they last saw their son, Chris Byers, around 5 p.m. The father, John, did admit that he did whip Chris for skateboarding out on a busy street, and he believes that maybe he's not home simply because he's just scared to come home. I mean, as you're a kid, you get hit, by your father. Not like beat up, but, you kind of get whipped. You might kind of have a little worry going back home. So Officer Meek ends up, kind of going out to go look for the boy. And while she's actually out and about looking for Chris, there is another call that wanted someone to go to a restaurant that was nearby called Bojangles. Now, the manager of Bojangles was calling and saying that there was a man that came into the restaurant covered in blood, went to the girl's bathroom, locked himself in there. They didn't really say for how long, but he was in there for a minute and then ended up leaving, going to the woods. So by the time Officer Meek got there, the man has already left. And she, said, he went off in the woods. And the interesting thing is Officer Meek never even got out of her vehicle, just kind of went to like the drive-through area or just kind of met the manager outside. Didn't even get out of the vehicle. Didn't even go and check out the scene or anything like that. Just decided to go and look for Chris again. And while Officer Meek was going to go look for this child, there was another call that she had to respond to. And that was actually from the neighbors of John and Melissa Byer, that they said that their son was also missing. And that call came around 9:24 p.m., from Todd and Dana Moore, saying that their son Michael Moore was also missing. Now, Mike was last seen around 6 p.m. with his friends, and he is friends with Chris Byers, and then there's another young boy that comes into it as well of Stevie Branch. Around this time now, the community kind of noticed, something bad must have happened. There's kids that are missing. It's late at night. So the community kind of realizes, dude, these are like 3 8-year-old boys. We have to find them. We have to see what's going on. There was a couple people that said that the last time they saw the boys, they're out on some dead-end road that's kind of surrounded by woods, a canal. A lot of kids like to go out there. They build forts. They play. So that was the last kind of area that they saw them. So they decide they're going to go search for the boys. Now, it is pitch dark. And if you can imagine, you have parents out there, they're just in the woods. They don't really have any leads. They're just kind of at the last area where the boys were seen, and they couldn't find anything. It got really late. The police decided that they're going to start the search again over in the morning. So now in the morning, lead investigator Gary Gitchell, he comes. He's going to take it over. Obviously, his first thing he wants to do is he kind of wants to interview the family members. He just kind of wants to find out a little bit more about them. He found out that the boys were in second grade. They were really close friends. Chris Byers, they said, was kind of like the leader of the friends. He was always known. He loved the Cub Scouts. He was always known to wear his Cub Scout uniform everywhere he went. And the reason I tell you that is that kind of comes into play a little bit further into this. And now the parents of Stevie Branch, Pam Hobbs and his stepdad, Terry Hobbs, they also, obviously said that their son was missing as well. So on that next day, they had close to 50 officers and volunteers that were looking for the boys. And, I mean, you got 50 people searching this 4-acre area of where the boys were last seen. And they even come up empty. Nobody found anything, like no blood, no nothing. Well, they all decided they're going to call it quits, try to regroup, kind of see, what they can do to figure out what has happened to these boys. There was one man who stayed behind. He was a junior probation officer named Steve Jones. While Steve Jones was kind of walking back in the canal in the woods, he happened to notice that there was a shoe in the water. So the shoe didn't have any shoelaces on it, and he said it seemed like a young boy's shoe. And at this time is where he actually radios for help to say, hey, I may have found something. Officer Allen was the very first officer that was on the scene. Decided he was just going to go walking right into the water. Now, this water is about 2 to 3 feet deep. It's very mucky, very dark. You can't really see a whole lot in it. And while he's walking in this water, he actually ends up dislodging a body, which they later found out it was the body of young Michael Moore, and his arms were tied to his legs with a pair of shoelaces. Now, obviously, they're radioing in, we got a body. They're going to keep searching this canal. So while he's walking further down, he notices that there was a Cub Scout hat in the water. Right away, that's going to catch his eye. That's Chris Byer, wears Cub Scout stuff all the time. And while he's walking further down, Detective Brian Ridge decides he's going to hop in the water as well. And now he's down on all fours. He's trying to stir up everything he can. Obviously, something got dislodged that brought up Mike Moore's body. Then he notices that there's a stick just kind of standing straight up out of the water, which is very interesting to him. And as he goes, he grabs the stick out of the water. When he brings it up, there's clothes wrapped around it. It's a pretty odd thing to be finding in a canal. And he kind of follows him a little bit, and he's going down the creek, up a couple feet, runs into another body, which they happen to identify as Stevie Branch's body. Now, Stevie was also tied up the same way that Michael was. The thing, he had a little bit different. His face was beaten. He had gouges on the side of his face. You can tell there was trauma. So you could just tell that the kid was severely beaten. Now, a little bit further down, Ridge ends up finding Chris Byers' body. He was beaten as well, tied up the same way, shoelaces, arms and legs. He noticed there was something a little bit different about Chris's body. So as he actually flipped Chris's body over, he did notice that his scrotum was cut and that the skin around his penis was peeled back and or cut off. That's kind of how they said it, was cut off and peeled back. So at this point now, this is no longer a missing persons case. This is now a murder case. So obviously they had to come back and let the media know pretty much that, there was bodies found. But the weird thing was to them is there was no blood at the crime scene at all. Absolutely no blood. They didn't find anything in the woods. It was bizarre to them. So as he comes out, Gary Gitchell is the one, obviously he's lead investigator. He's the one coming out to let the media know they're already there with cameras about finding the young boys' bodies. And right away, they had the video kind of playing a little bit. You heard the uproar, people screaming. You had Mrs. Hobbs, she actually fainted. There was a huge news story on it. And, yeah, the whole scene kind of got chaotic a little bit. Now, it kind of jumps over to where the autopsy was performed, and they did find out that 2 of the boys were sexually assaulted and beaten and drowned in the creek, which now this just causes a huge scare in the community. None of the parents want to let their kids outside. They said for the next week or so, it was just a ghost town. They interviewed some of the parents in the community, some of the kids. They couldn't even leave their yard. They were just pretty much saying, my kid's gonna stay in my yard. I have a fenced-in yard, and that's where he will stay. He will not, be going anywhere until obviously somebody gets held responsible for what's going on. Now, while the police are doing their investigation, the manager from Bojangles likes to call them and remind them that, hey, there was that gentleman that came in my restaurant. He was covered in blood. There's still blood all over the bathroom. And I still have a pair of sunglasses here that the gentleman was wearing. So you'd think right away, okay, that is definitely something we have to look into. Also, while that was going on, the police did get a tip of a 19-year-old kid named Chris Morgan. He used to drive a ice cream truck around the area. Someone said that they noticed that after a couple of days of the murders, he just up and left to Florida. So that was kind of suspicious to the police. So the police end up bringing Chris back for questioning. They're kind of asking him what he did the night of the murders, and his response was just, hey, I was out clubbing. I was nowhere even near that crime scene area. But there was a moment during the interview where his whole demeanor kind of changed. He got really aggravated. He actually at one point put a tissue up on the camera. Then they kind of talked him down, where Chris kind of calms down a little bit. He's admitting that he's a drug addict and he has a problem of, while he's drinking, of blacking out. And then he kind of says, there is a possibility, I guess, that I just blacked out. I may have hurt those kids. And I don't know. So the police right away, they think they got a confession. They're kind of geared to, lock him up. And minutes later, Chris changes his story, says there is no way he committed the murders. So it wasn't a solid confession, I guess, to really hold him at all. They did end up taking some DNA samples from him. I want to say it was blood and some urine that they got from him. And then the police kind of started to go a different way about it. Now, this was back in the 90s, where apparently in this area there was a huge craze going around of satanic, goth, that was kind of coming into play in their area as well. And they noticed that there was, the night of the murder, there was a full moon. So they started kind of, maybe this is some kind of ritual thing from the satanic people that are coming into our area. So they end up turning to a retired police officer from the force that was on the force for 26 years, who is now an occult expert by the name of Dale Griffiths. He says he has a PhD in mind control of cults. I've never heard of that. I guess I never really looked into it. But he kind of brings the attention to a young man who lives in the area who, I guess you can say, dresses gothic. He's got the black clothes, the black pants. I was wearing a black trench coat. So they end up thinking of one kid right away, name of Damien Eccles. he was just that guy that stood out. High school dropout, always dressed in black. There was a lot of people that said they knew about him being kind of satanic. Even though, Damien did dress that way, his family still said, he was a normal kid. He just loved to skateboard. He loved to hang out with his friends. Yeah, he's had some run-ins in the past, with police. He's not who everyone says he is. And there were some people, they started saying that Damien likes to drink blood. And at one point he was talking about, killing his father. So obviously they want to talk to Damien. Now, Damien was also very known to read a lot about, religion. He was really into the Catholic religion. They found out later that he really got into what they call Wicca religion. So they decide, we're going to bring him in. So Officer Jerry Driver actually was the one that got him brought in. He ended up searching the home of Damien, found out there's a lot of Satan drawings, a lot of the drawings of that half goat, half man. There was a lot of books about Satan. So he kind of was like, I think we may have gotten the guy, but I don't believe that only one person is involved in killing 3 young boys. So they decide they're going to start looking at Damien's friends as well. Well, Damien's best friend, Jason Baldwin, during the documentary, it was Charles Baldwin. So I'm assuming he either changed his name or maybe Jason is a middle name. Either way, he goes by Jason Baldwin now. On there, it was considered Charles Baldwin. So if you guys watch the documentary, that's why I'm saying Jason, because that's what his name was, except for when they showed the old media stories, it was Charles Baldwin. They happened to live in the same trailer park. He was also known as an outcast. He always wore the black. He liked to listen, to heavy metal music. Him and Damien were always together. They actually ended up pulling Damien to the police station to question him, while they were questioning Jason over at home. While they were questioning Damien, he did admit that he was involved in the Wicca religion. They asked him about where he was the night of the murders. He was out with his girlfriend, got picked up later by his mom, and then he was just talking to a friend on the phone for the remainder of the night. They weren't really getting anywhere with him, so the police kind of switched up their tactics, and they started asking Damien, who he thinks could have done something like this. His response, was kind of chilling to them. He's like, oh, it's probably someone just looking for a thrill kill. Now, that kind of didn't really go his way during it, and they wanted to kind of figure out a little bit more about this Wicca religion, which a lot of people said was satanic religion. So they were asking if there was any significant things about this in Wicca religion. 3 boys. They said, yeah, the number 3 is very important in the Wicca religion, and also blood is a big part of their religion as well. And then they asked him, what about water? Just because of how the boys were drowned. And he goes, oh, water is like considered a life force in this religion. So after hearing Damien kind of talk about that, police right away, we got our number 1 suspect. They didn't really say a whole lot about what Jason was getting questioned on. I want to say it was his parents told him, you don't need to talk to them, unless you have a lawyer. This is, kind of ridiculous. And the police ended up getting another tip about a third person that hangs out with Damien and Jason. And he also, high school dropout, 17 years old, by the name of Jesse Miskelly. Now, Vicky Hutchinson was the one that actually tipped the police about Jesse. She's hired him as a babysitter before. So she kind of knew him. And she also said that she did go to one of the cult meetings with all 3 of the boys, Jason, Damien, and Jesse. So obviously she was uncomfortable. She said there was some weird witchcraft going on. There was loud music, and she didn't feel comfortable there, wanted to leave. Damien ended up bringing her home, but she's like, I will not put it past, anyone that's part of this cult to do this. So the police finally decide they're going to pull in Jesse. Everyone has known that, Jesse, obviously, he's not the smartest kid on the block. Now he's in there talking to police officers. They had him in there for roughly, it said 5.5 hours interrogation. They ended up putting him on a polygraph test, which he agreed to. And during the test, the guy that was doing the test was like, he is lying his ass off. Now, that doesn't look good for Jesse. He's been in there 5.5 hours. He finally kind of starts breaking down and saying, you know what, yes, I am part of a cult, and Damien and Jason are in there with me. They kind of ask him what they do at these rituals. He admits that they kill dogs and they have sex with the girls in the woods that they actually happen to bring to the meetings. So they kind of pressure him a little bit more about the night of the murders. Jesse did say that Jason invited him to come out to the woods with him and Damien that night. And then he just kind of went off. He was just saying, we saw the boys. Damien called the boys over. They ended up coming over right away. And then he said that's kind of where everything just went south. Damien ended up just hitting one of the boys and just started sexually assaulting him right away. And Jason followed suit right behind Damien. He did the same thing. But the thing that was weird that they noticed that as he was saying this in his interview, he was very monotone about everything. He didn't really show any emotion. He just, everything he was describing that was horrific, like it didn't faze him. And then he's talking about how they started to tie him up. He just up and left. He ran away. He didn't want nothing to do with it. And that was the last that he saw them. Now, a month later, after the murders and after Jesse's confession, they figured, all right, we got our guys. They go to the trailer park. They arrest Jason and Damien. Guns are drawn. Told them they're being arrested for 3 counts of capital murder. And even after that was all said and done, they had the press conference with the media. The police said that they were 11 out of 10 positive that they have the correct guys in custody. And this case is now going to be solved, and they're going to get what they deserve, pretty much. The media started asking for some arrest records, but the judge that's going to be handling the case, he said that the records are sealed and he was not going to release them. But somehow Jesse's confession tape ended up being leaked, and that was all over the news. Now, with the community hearing the things that Jesse was saying, that kind of started a whole new, can of worms there, where a lot of people just started going to their local churches. They're looking at their pastors for guidance. They said that there's a satanic uproar in the community. So it was just a crazy, crazy time going on in this kind of smaller community. Jesse Kelly actually ended up getting a coin-appointed attorney who was in the documentary quite a bit of Dan Stidham, who he thought right away, he's going to walk into this. There's going to be a guilty plea. He already confessed, trying to see what he's going to have to do in court. But while he was interviewing Jesse, he just kept telling him over and over and over that it was a false confession, that none of that, everything that he said was not true. Dan decided he wanted to go back and kind of do his own little case investigation, kind of look at things a little bit to see what he can come up with. And that's where he started to kind of believe that there's a possibility that all 3 of these kids were innocent the entire time. He actually went back and looked at the poly test that Jesse took, and he realized that Jesse passed the poly test. The only part where he showed deception was the part where they asked him if he's taken drugs before. You got a 17-year-old kid, doesn't really want to admit to the cops that he's doing drugs. That was the only part that he actually showed deception. And Jesse, obviously, he only has an IQ of like 72 that he finds out, reads at a third grade level, and he kind of felt like he was dealing with a 5-year-old. So he's just like, there's no way. This guy, he just was agreeing with everything that these officers were saying. All of it's public knowledge that was on the news. Kind of what the police were saying before. And it was at that moment that he kind of realized, dude, these guys, they could be telling the truth. It's possible they didn't do anything. So it kind of jumps to the court where David Burnett, who actually, he was the judge that was on the case. He wanted to do it in 2 separate trials. One was going to be for Damien and Jason, and the other one was going to be for Jesse, strictly because Jesse was the one that had the confession. So they wanted to split it up. At Jesse's, they wanted him to testify against Damien and Jason, and if he did, he would avoid the death penalty. Now, Jesse has already said, there's no way I'm going to say that. My confession was false, and I will never repeat it. So now the court cases are starting. The boys are, obviously when they're walking into court, they're just getting yelled at. They're getting death threats. The entire community is there just hoping that these guys burn in hell. Like the anger that was there. Jason Baldwin, I want to say, was the only one in the documentary who kind of talked about everything. He just said, he felt like, people just wanted me to burn in hell and die for something, I did not do. So the first guy that they show on the stand is Officer Ridge. He was the one that was crawling on all fours, and he found the 2 remaining bodies. He was the first one. So his whole thing was painting the picture for the jury. So if you go back to the crime scene, he's telling them about how, the first body was discovered. Now I'm searching the water, and, I see these sticks. They have clothes. How the boys were tied up. They were beaten. How I found little Chris Byers. He's painting the picture for the jury of this horrific scene. That was his biggest thing on the stand. Now, the defense is going to come and cross-examine Ridge. Now, this is interesting, was when they cross-examined him, they asked about the results from the blood tests that were found at Bojangles and the sunglasses that were left behind at the restaurant. It could have matched either the boy's blood. They could have built a profile on the murderer. And Ridge, while he was on the stand, actually said that the evidence was never turned in and he actually lost it. How do you lose such evidence like that could possibly bring you right to the killer? You if it had any of the boys' bloods, you knew you had that man there. They could have been checking cameras. They could have been doing whatever they could have done. It's possible they could have got their guy right there. But obviously, I guess the evidence was lost. Not quite sure how that happens. They brought up the person that did the autopsy, Peretti. They were next on the stand, and they kind of talked about, what happened to Chris Byers, how, the scrotum was cut and, the skin was peeled from the penis, and they said it could have been a serrated knife just because of how it was cut. During the police searching Damien's house and Jason's house, I guess Jason has like a creek or maybe like a pond behind his trailer. They actually found a serrated knife in the water. They had divers go back there, and they found one at the bottom. So they kind of brought that out in the court case as well, to say this was found behind Jason's home. So that's kind of where that knife is coming into play. And then they're bringing another boy, I guess I would say, up on the stand by the name of Michael Carson, who happened to do juvenile time with Jason Baldwin. after he was arrested, because Jason was only, I want to say, 16 years old. So Carson's on the stand, and he said with his conversation with Jason, he went into very vivid details about the murders, and he told him that him and his friends were the ones that committed it. While he was getting cross-examined, they actually found out that Jason only had 2 conversations with this kid, and was kind of like, I don't really believe that this kid is going to be saying this on the second conversation that he's ever had with you. Now, a lot of people thought that there was a possibility that Michael Carson was just up on the stand to maybe lessen his sentence, whatever he was in there for. So that one they just kind of briefly went through that one. Now, the next person on the stand was Dale Griffiths. That was the retired police officer, now has the PhD, and he was up there for being the occult expert. And, he's trying to explain why there was no blood on the scene. He says, that blood is very sacred in this cult. You save it. It's a special life force. He's kind of going off about what he knows about cults. And weird turn of events, I guess they ended up putting Damien up on the stand next. So, hold on. Before that one, let's go back to the cross-examination of Dale Griffiths. I forgot to bring this one up. They kind of shut him down with one question that they asked him. So they asked him what classes did he attend in 1980, between 1980 and 1982, when he said that he obtained his PhD on occult studies. Griffiths actually told them he didn't attend any classes, and it was pretty much what happened was he got a mail-in PhD. So he didn't attend classes. He didn't go to an accredited school. So right away the defense is like, you know what? I want this guy's testimony stricken from the record. Dale Griffiths, he doesn't even have an actual degree. He's just saying that he does by doing like some I don't know if we'd say online schooling, but doing some mail-in degree. So they want that stricken from the record. Judge, right away, he comes out, you don't need a degree to be an expert, which I agree with that. You really don't. I'm a firm believer that, no, you don't need a degree to be an expert in a field. If you spend a lot of time, whether it's studying martial arts or, studying anything that you're interested in, you can put so much time, you can have so much knowledge on it. You can be considered an expert. You don't need to have a degree to, I don't know. To me, yeah, I agree with that 110%. You don't need a degree to be an expert. So I do agree with that statement there. Briefly, they kind of describe some of the clothing fibers that were found at the scene. There was a robe, I guess, they found in Jason's house. They said there was a possibility of secondary transfer. So they kind of debunked, I guess, that one right away. They had 2 experts come in on fibers of clothing, and one said it's a match, the other one said it was not a match, and they kind of had their own little battle. It wasn't really that significant to that apparent case. They didn't really look into it a whole lot. But this is where they brought up Damien Eccles, the Ling reader, up on the stand. Damien's kind of fighting for his life here. Was it risky to put him up there? It probably was, but if you're fighting for your life, why not, right? Now, was up on the stand, he kind of explains, what the Wicca religion is and how different it is from satanic religion, or Satanism is what they call it. Wicca actually worships a goddess, and they believe in everything with nature, and they don't really get into the whole violence thing. And they asked him, for all 3 boys, did you kill Michael Moore? No. Did you kill Chris Byers? No. Did you kill Stevie? No. Um, Now the prosecution is kind of coming up and asking him about some of the stuff that was found in his room. Once again, the Satan books, the half goat, half man, everything that was in his notebooks there. They're kind of asking him about it. And they also were asking him if he knew of a man by the name of Aleister Crowley. Damien kind of says, I've heard of him, but never read any of his work. Now, Aleister Crowley was a drug addict, satanic cult leader that was from England. He's been known to do just some horrific shit. They didn't really get into it a whole lot, but he's a bad man. There was a notebook that actually had some symbols in it where it looked like it was written in code, and it happened to be Aleister's code that he came up with. Now, as they were comparing the code, they found out that in this code that Aleister has written was Damien's name, Jason's name, and Aleister's name as well. Right here is where it kind of looks bad for Damien, because if he's never read any of Aleister's material, how does he know his code? That is something that they wanted the jury to kind of see, like, this kid might not be telling us the truth. While watching it, I was like, that is kind of sketchy how you know this code, but you've never read anything from this man. They also kind of play some of the interview that Damien had at the police station, where they're trying to say, this guy kind of knew too much about the murders. He seemed kind of cocky, he seemed kind of arrogant, but that was just kind of the kind of kid that, Damien was. So everything, it wasn't really looking that good for him, that was up on the stands. Damien's response to that is, everything that I said in that interview is actually public knowledge due to all the news reports. So Damien didn't look that good on the stand. It was a little rough to watch, I guess. It seemed kind of like a struggle. Jason's attorney came up next. They each had their own attorneys. Damien had his, Jason had his. And Jason's attorney actually just brought up one witness, and that was the guy about the clothing fibers and, how did this fiber get at the crime scene. He was the one that said, like I said, it didn't match. That's it. That was it. Jason thought he was going to get up on the stand to actually defend himself, and his attorney said, no, I want you to sit here, stay quiet, and just don't say anything. And he rests his case right there. Jason was very upset about that. He wanted to paint the picture of the kind of kid that he is, but he was never allowed to do that. One day of deliberation from the jury, and they actually came up with their verdict. All three boys, Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly, were all found guilty on all three counts of capital murder. Damien, for being kind of the ringleader of what they said, was actually sentenced to death. Right away, all three of the boys, they're filing for appeals. That can be a very lengthy process. And it was actually 2 years later, finally, the Arkansas Supreme Court came to a unanimous decision, and they upheld their conviction, and they're not going to get their appeals. Well, in 1996, there was an HBO special that was released on the case, and that's where things kind of started to look up for the guys. I say guys because, now they're in prison. They've grown up, and they started to kind of get support from people in the community. There's a woman by the name of Kathy Backen. She's the co-founder of Free the West Memphis 3. She kind of shows a documentary to two of her friends to kind of see if they agree with her on their innocence. They kind of did their own little research. And they decided that they're going to write the boys. They're going to meet with them. They kind of had their own videos. And they kind of wanted to show the type of guys. I keep jumping between boys and guys. They wanted to show the type of guys that they actually were. Now, they started this website. They got a lot of support. They ended up getting support from some celebrities. For example, the Metallica was kind of promoting. Johnny Depp was in there promoting. You're going to get some big names in there. And at this time, DNA testing has been a little bit more advanced now. They wanted to prove that there was no possibility that they were anywhere near the crime scene. So they're kind of looking into some things again, and they actually did happen to find out that there was a hair that was on one of the young boys' shoes, and that came up, and they're trying to figure out, okay, now whose hair could this possibly be? Well, they kind of look back, and the police were looking into it, and they realized that there was one parent that they never really questioned. They never really got to sit down and talk with, and that was actually Terry Hobbs. They decided to go have a little talk with Terry Hobbs over at his home, and he was just chain smoking the whole time. There was a point where he actually did walk away, and one of the officers ended up grabbing a cigarette butt to get some DNA from him. And when they were talking to Terry about that night, he said that the night of the murders, he actually dropped his wife off at work around 5, and he started looking for the boys at 6 p.m. Well, we already know that second call that came in was at 9:24 p.m. The boys weren't even reported missing until 6 p.m. So that kind of drew some red flags of why is this guy saying he was searching for the boys at 6 p.m. when they weren't really a missing person yet. So due to the new DNA that, kind of came in, they found out that Terry Hobbs's DNA from his cigarette butt matched the hair DNA that they found that was at the crime scene. Now they have a new trial. They finally granted the West Memphis 3 a new trial. There happened to be a new judge in town by the name of David Aleister. And before any of this could even start, August 2011, David Aleister got a call about an Alfred plea. Now, I've talked about Alfred pleas before in my last one with the staircase. If you guys haven't checked that one out, go check it out. An Alfred plea is you have to admit guilt, but you actually do get to walk away free from prison. And at this point, the guys have been in prison for 18 years. Well, Jason Baldwin, he didn't want to take that plea because he wanted to continuously say, I want to clear my name. I am innocent. We are all innocent. This is not right. So it took a little bit of convincing. Jason actually finally decided he was going to agree because the only way that this Alfred plea was going to happen is if all three of them agreed to admit guilt so they can walk out of prison the next day. Unfortunately, it's just going to be on their record. Jason took the Alfred plea simply to save his best friend, Damian Eccles' life because he was on death row. They had a little bit of a conference where he said the only reason I'm taking this plea is so they do not kill Damian. All three of the West Memphis 3 were released, and now the community is in an uproar. Who did this? All eyes now are turning on Terry Hobbs. Even one of the boys' fathers was like, I'm pretty sure Terry Hobbs is the one that killed my boy. But that was short-lived. they decided that the hair was a secondary transfer due to the boys always being in Terry Hobbs' home. They were at his home earlier that night. So that was very short-lived. They did happen to find a small amount of DNA on a shoe, but it didn't match any of the West Memphis 3, and it didn't match Terry Hobbs. So there was a small part of DNA, but they didn't have enough to actually create a profile. Now, could this be the DNA of the man that was in Bojangles that night? Could this have been resolved if Officer Ridge didn't lose that evidence of the blood and the sunglasses? No one knows. And I guess to this day, to the police department, from my understanding, is the 3 are out on Alfred Plea. They were the ones that did it. They had the correct people the entire time, and they're not really following any other leads. The boys are out. Jason Baldwin, he actually now helps people who feel like they're wrongfully convicted. So he's kind of going off his life story. It's a nonprofit organization, an organization called Proclaimed Justice. Jesse, Miss Kelly, happens to work and still live in West Memphis. And Damian Eccles actually ended up becoming a movie producer, an author, and an artist. And he's living with his wife, Lori Eccles. I want to say over in Massachusetts when I looked it up. So as far as I know, I did a little bit of research to see if anyone was held accountable for this. As far as I know, nobody has been held accountable. They're not really following any leads. They are still saying it was Jason Baldwin, Jesse Miss Kelly, and Damian Eccles. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I love doing these ones that, you know, kind of make you think. I don't know. I want to say it was the guy that was covered in blood, you know, that was in the restaurant that night. If they wouldn't have lost that evidence, if they could have, you know, somehow gotten that DNA, just to even go question, you know, just to figure out, did this guy have a record? You know, do we have a file on this guy? They also kind of said, you know, hey, there was a truck stop that was pretty close to that area. Possibility there was a trucker that, you know, was just kind of passing through and this all went down. I guess that's for everyone else to decide, kind of come up with your own conclusion. That's mine. My conclusion, I think it was the man that was in Bojangles that night, and they missed their opportunity to catch who actually did do this. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Once again, feel free to message down in the comments what you think. If you have another one that's kind of unsolved, let me know in the comments as well. I would love to do research. I love to watch the documentary on it if there is one. I also love to have discussions. So if there's one that you would even like to talk to me about, you know, I do have my Discord in the description down below too. You can join the Discord. I have my own little area in there for podcast topics. If it's something that you're very passionate about, I do like to talk to people as well. We can get you in. We can talk. We can have a discussion about it. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. If you want to hear more, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And I hope you guys have a great one. And I'll see you in the next one.